safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
If I get the feeling you've been cheated.
It is Thursday, August 15th, 2024. My name is Emma Vigeland, in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Matthew McManus, author of The Political Theory of Liberal Socialism. And later in the show, Rebecca Burns of In These Times will join us to talk about the Republican rich guys pushing anti-homeless bills around the country. Also on the program today, Harris begins to roll out an economic platform which includes a federal ban on price gouging. Her speech on this is also said to include a revival of the child tax credit and housing initiatives. This comes after the White House announces $6 billion in government savings and $1.5 billion in out-of-pocket savings for seniors starting in 2026 on prescription drugs, the results of the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act. As Trump tries to falsely take credit for the cap on insulin, which also passed in 2022 in the Inflation Reduction Act. It's official, J.D. Vance and Tim Walz will debate on October 1st. Vance says he wants even more debates, which is not something you say when you think you're winning. Trump asked the judge to delay his September 18th sentencing in the hush money case until after the election. RFK tried to meet with Harris to say, hey, I'll endorse you if you put me in your cabinet. And she declined to take the meeting. Obviously.
Yeah.
Emerson polling now has Kamala up by 4 nationally. The margin of error in that poll is 3. Zelensky says Ukrainian troops have taken full control of the Russian town of Sudza, their largest seizure yet, hopefully leverage for peace, ? After the umpteenth time Netanyahu changed the terms of the ceasefire deal, and after Israel killed Hamas's top negotiator, Hamas is not showing up for Cairo ceasefire talks. This is exactly what Israel wanted, by the way. Meanwhile, the official death toll in Gaza now exceeds 40,000. It is way higher than that. That's just who they can find.
Also, death is not the only bad outcome there for folks.
Good point. Dismemberment, starvation, untold trauma, displacement. The Columbia University president who sent cops on her own students has resigned. And lastly, 500,000 without power in Puerto Rico after being hit by Hurricane Ernesto, which makes its way to Bermuda now. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome to the show, everybody. It's an EmMajority Report Thursday, and it's like, I'll say this is one of my favorite shows when you and I get to chat and talk and do it, just the two of us, because that's really, I mean, no shade on Matt and
Brandon.
No shade on Matt Binder and Brandon Sutton, but everyone's on vacation right now. Bradley's out today, so
we kind of took a vacation on Left Reckoning. It's summer hours, folks.
It really is. It really is. It's the dog days, and Matt and I just get to chat today, which I always have fun with.
I knew Bradley was out. I had no idea Matt and Brandon were out.
I know, right? So I guess they've got lives, or you could just be like me and constantly consume news and not do anything else. That's what I did yesterday. Well, I did read a little yesterday.
Emma unplugged yesterday.
I did a little. I've been reading Dune because I've been only reading nonfiction, and that's not really unplugging, especially if it's like another book about Israel.
It's not good for the soul.
Yeah, so I'm reading Dune. It's pretty damn good, actually. I'm enjoying it quite a bit. Let's start here. So, last night, JD Vance went on Laura Ingram's program, and Laura Ingram asked him a very leading question, shocked face, about suburban women and Republican struggles with them, as we get a new story seemingly every day about how JD Vance views women and families in this extremely retrograde,
maybe the most
ill-advised way.
Maybe the most ill-advised podcast circuit in the history of politics.
The latest one, and we'll get to that later, was him going, of course, on one of the Weinstein's podcasts. And
the one that works for Peter Thiel.
The one who's the managing director of his firm, and said that grandmothers are aka postmenopausal females, are there to help parents raise children. This is a normal way that you talk about women, apparently. So, like, suburban women are a little turned off by this. And Laura's like, I don't understand that. But this is her question to him. Oh, no sound.
JD, one of my, Senator, excuse me, I still call you JD. Senator, one of my dear friends tonight said to me, well, all these suburban women, all they care about is abortion, and they don't understand that decision is with the states now. It's not banned nationally, even if some people want it to be banned nationally. It's with the states. What do you say to suburban women out there who are marinating in this propaganda?
Well, first of all, I don't buy that, Laura. I think most suburban women care about the normal things that most Americans care about, right? They care about inflation. They care about the price of groceries. They care about public safety in the streets where their kids play. Look, as Donald Trump has said, he wants the American people at the state level to decide abortion policy. And you compare that to the Democrats who want to do nationalized, taxpayer-funded abortion up to the moment of birth. I think Donald Trump is actually trying to identify the reasonable compromise where he lets California figure out its abortion policy, Alabama and Ohio figure out their abortion policy. That is actually the common sense approach, and it's the approach that's most respectful of the American people. The Democrats are obsessed with late-term abortion and making sure taxpayers fund it. Obviously, Republicans disagree with that, but I think that Donald Trump has charted a very reasonable course for the American people. Let the American people decide this. The federal government, we're going to focus on securing that border and bringing down the cost of groceries and housing.
Okay, so that is, by the way, not true. I don't know why I have to do this every time because, well, I have to because they keep repeating this lie that the Democrats want federally funded abortion. There's something called the Hyde Amendment that makes that actually illegal.
Which we should get rid of.
Which we should get rid of, yes. But that's not in the platform for the Democrats at this point because we should get rid of it because we should have socialized health care where all care is included, including trans-affirming care and abortion care. But we're not expecting that right now.
The thing we're
Democrats are not running on that at all.
What the reframe needs to be, what we're saying we don't need until birth is any sort of GOP lawyers or judges getting involved in the healthcare decisions of women. That's very simple. That's what we need. We don't need you. If doctors make that decision about like late-term abortions based on emergency situations. We don't need none of y'all to be statutorily defining things or making there certain things like penalties. Stay out of it.
But that's why the Walls attack where he says mind your own damn business is so effective because that's exactly right. We'll be talking in a bit with Matt McManus about like the concept of liberal socialism and reclaiming liberalism for rights while also pushing for like robust state policy to make people's lives better. And that's something that, I think is a really compelling argument. And I'm not expecting socialism or anything close to it from the Walls or the Harris-Walls ticket. But that kind of reframe for the Democratic Party with a more Keynesian economic model is a refreshing change from the neoliberal era of Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, etc.
Not just about privacy.
Exactly. And about liberty in the marketplace, too. Their version of liberalism. But just to fact check him, 91% of all abortions are performed in the first trimester. Around 99% of abortions are performed during the first 20 weeks. Democrats don't want to have death squads executing babies when they come out of the womb. That's not a thing.
I don't know.
The 1% that is there are for fetal abnormalities and when the life of the mother is in question. And why these laws are so harmful is because when you're in a medical emergency like that, you can't have the threat of like prosecution of the doctor or legal liability before they can go through all of these hoops to determine an exception, because someone's life, or say like their reproductive health, as is the case in that example from the woman from Texas who wasn't able to get an abortion, so she was damaged to the point where she can't have children anymore. That is why you can't have these laws, because they are the exceptions that even the Republicans gesture towards are non-actionable.
Two considerations that should not come into women's healthcare, or any healthcare for that matter, is what do J.D. Vance and his Republican friends think about this?
Yeah.
And what do the profit makers at the top of this think about this?
Well, okay, but so, the suburban women have been marinating in this propaganda, though. I mean, they've been marinating in those cold, hard facts that I just laid out for you about what abortion really means in practice. Let's just see what this incredible I'm being sarcastic, overly so. It's ridiculous. But the point is that they're scared about this because suburban women really are something that Republicans need to win over. That's how Trump won. The only time that he did win in 2016 was particularly white suburban women. But that's not happening right now. This is Frank Luntz on CNBC. And look, he's a Republican pollster. But some of this information I actually think is credible and flies in the face of what Laura Ingraham and Vance are trying to portray there.
President Harris gaining ground in some swing states and even eroding some of former President Trump's lead in Florida. Our next guest says if the election were held today, she would win. Joining us right now is pollster and political strategist Frank Luntz. That's a turn.
It's more than that.
That's a plot twist.
She's bringing out people who are not interested in voting for either Trump or Biden. So the entire electoral pool has changed. And if it continues in this direction, you have to start to consider Democrats winning the Senate and Democrats winning the House. The actual people who are participating, she's got intensity now. She's got an intensity advantage. She's got a demographic advantage. And I haven't seen anything like this happen in 30 days in my lifetime.
How big is that marginal extra voter that she's bringing in? I mean, how much does that change the pool?
1%, maybe 2%. That's it. But that's enough.
Right.
Can I just ask you, though, about the veracity, frankly, of the polls right now? Because you go back and look, and there was an interesting report yesterday showing that if you look at where Donald Trump was in terms of what the polling showed, this is back in 2016, undercounted. You go even in 2020, undercounted. And so, you start to think about the, margin of error situation where maybe she's up, 1 or 2%. But, is the Trump vote fully counted?
But that's why my process is not just to do the numbers. It's also to do the focus groups, to listen, to understand why people feel this way. And now my groups are broken up by young women saying, I'm not voting for him anymore. Make no mistake, there are 3 attributes, 3 components.
So you think it's a switch? It's not, because you just said, I'm not voting for them anymore. So you think they were voting for Donald Trump, and now they're voting for Harris?
The people who are undecided have all collapsed towards Harris. The people who are weak Trump have all collapsed towards undecided. It's this broad shift. I'm trying to do a focus group tonight with undecided voters under the age of 27 for a major news outlet. And I can't recruit young women to this because they don't exist as undecided voters. And you shift the demographics and you shift the entire outcome. There are issues, attributes, and the conditions of the country. The issues and conditions favor Donald Trump. He should be winning this election. But the attributes are so much in Harris's favor that he's not. that the very attributes that Trump offers, and the best example, you did the story on the UAW, why is Donald Trump saying publicly, I want to fire the same people that he's getting now, still getting union members? It's ridiculous. It's as though he's lost control. And I know that there are billionaires who watch this show who are spending a lot of money on Donald Trump, and they don't understand why he's committing political suicide.
Political suicide, say the billionaires that are watching CNBC. I mean, these are the relevant people that Frank Luntz is appealing to here. But
I like to go right from, I don't understand why he's attacking firing laborers for unionizing. And then also the billionaires are upset that he's, but that's probably, that's a tough coalition, I think, to keep together.
Right. There have been, so to be fair to J.D. Vance and Laura Ingraham, when they're talking about suburban women, I guess under 27, them females being undecided, or not being undecided, breaking entirely towards Harris, maybe doesn't say exactly what it looks like for Donald Trump and J.D. Vance as it relates to suburban women and mothers in suburbia, right? Perhaps they're more in the 35 to 50-year-old age group. But it doesn't look good. And that dynamic is playing out across polling. And it's not just Luntz's anecdotes, like the double hater dynamic that Nate Cohn wrote about.
Shout out to all the double haters. Your instincts were correct.
Yes, we were the double haters. And we could say we're not representative of anything given our level of political interest. But I was a double hater to a degree, although I, always advocate really voting for Democrats for harm reduction purposes. Although this was the first time I was like, genocide, Joe, man. But there is the double hater dynamic was that people were going to just sit out the election entirely. And that more than halved after Biden dropped out and Harris came into the race. The point was that nobody wanted either of these two guys again. And now it's about the change candidate, and she has that on her side.
I would like to thank Hollywood for making Americans so sick of sequels that they basically naturally term limit these people out.
Right, exactly. All right, we're going to be speaking to Matt McManus in just a second, but first a word from our sponsor, EarthBreeze. EarthBreeze Eco Sheets look just like a dryer sheet, but it's ultra-concentrated, liquidless laundry detergent. It is the best of all worlds. EarthBreeze is tough on stains and odors while being kind to the planet and your skin, and EarthBreeze has a deal for you. Right now, you can subscribe to EarthBreeze and save 40%. Go to earthbreeze.com/majority to get started. We'd like to thank EarthBreeze for supporting our show and supporting the planet and my laundry, because I've got no room in the one bedroom that I live in because it's all my crap, my fiance's crap. Anywhere I can save space, I take it. And EarthBreeze is incredible in that way because I can just slide that basically envelope in with the rest of my cleaning products, and I don't have to take up a bunch of space with a huge detergent jug. EarthBreeze Eco Sheets are also dermatologist tested, hypoallergenic, free of bleach, dyes, and parabens. There's a fragrance-free option if you are sensitive to fragrances like Sam. It also, EarthBreeze got rid of unnecessary chemicals for a formula that is kind of sensitive skin of all ages, including babies. No more heavy lifting or measuring sticky blue goo from a massive plastic jug. EarthBreeze's lightweight cardboard packaging takes up a fraction of the space in your laundry room and offers flexible subscriptions delivered via carbon offset shipping right to your door for free. Because unfortunately, you will never run out of laundry, but now you will also never run out of detergent. You should give it a try, and if you decide to go back to your old stuff for some reason, you get a full refund of your EarthBreeze purchase, no questions asked. These tiny sheets can stop millions of detergent jugs from entering our ecosystems. In fact, 500 million detergent jugs end up in landfills and oceans every single year. 91% of single-use plastic does not get recycled, including the stuff we put in our recycling bins. We had an expert on this to talk about this dynamic. Glass, and it's effectively recycled. Aluminum, not plastic. That's the result of lobbying from the oil and gas industry, which makes plastic. So single-use plastics are very harmful. Scientists say the ocean will have more plastic in it than fish by the year 2050. Make a positive impact in the world, and it doesn't have to come at a cost to you. My clothes are clean. They smell great. I feel like I did something good just by doing my laundry. Right now, my listeners can receive 40% off EarthBreeze just by going to earthbreeze.com/majority. That's earthbreeze.com/majority to cut out single-use plastic in your laundry room and claim 40% off your subscription. earthbreeze.com/majority. All right, folks, quick break, and when we come back, we'll be talking to Matt McManus. We are back, and we are joined by Matthew McManus, lecturer in political science at the University of Michigan, author of The Political Theory of Liberal Socialism. Matt, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me. I've been a longtime fan, so it's kind of surreal to be here.
Oh, awesome. That's good to hear. Yeah, your book comes out in November, so we're getting ahead of things here. But
might have to have you back on.
Yes, exactly. Follow up for this conversation because, it'll be interesting to see, I think, how the election shapes some of the conversations surrounding liberalism and like what the role of the state is, and moving past, fingers crossed, some of the worst of neoliberalism, but we can get into that in a bit. Your book centers around, of course, liberal socialism, this concept. A lot of liberals might see those two things as incongruent, as socialism being inconsistent with liberalism, particularly like free market liberalism. How do you upend that kind of rhetorical contradiction on its face, at least?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I know it's a question a lot of people have on their minds because I get, boy, oh boy, do I get a lot of angry emails about that, right? And like you said, it's interesting because this election year, I think you've really seen these debates become more pertinent than they have in a long time. It seems like forever ago, but it was really a couple weeks when J.D. Vance was, decided upon as Trump's running mate, and everyone was talking about, how this was a shift away from neoliberalism on the part of the Republican Party, and now we're going to see what's going to happen with Kamala Harris. But it looks like with the Waltz pick, she might be very gently moving away from this. So, fingers crossed, like you said, we're going to see a break with that sometime soon. But the kind of argument that I make in my book is we have to be really careful in distinguishing different kinds of liberalisms. This is a point I take from Alan Ryan, who's a great scholar of the liberal tradition. So there are many bad sides to liberalism, as any good leftist would know, that we need to be extremely critical of. The big one that I target in my book is what's sometimes called the possessive individualist tradition, or classical liberal tradition, to use C.B. Macpherson's term. And this is the kind of liberal tradition that holds that fundamentally we're all atoms living within society. Each individual looks after themselves and tries to compete with one another to acquire as much stuff as they can over a short to long period of time. And for pretty obvious reasons, I think any leftist would reject that version of liberalism as incompatible with our commitments to things like equality and commitment to things like solidarity. But what I try to point out in my book is that there's a very different kind of liberal tradition out there, the kind of liberalism that, say, Sam Moyn talks about a lot in his book, Liberalism Against Itself, early on. A revolutionary, egalitarian, solidaristic kind of liberalism embodied very early on in the writings of people like Mary Wollstonecraft and Thomas Paine. And these liberals took very seriously concerns like economic equality, the kinds of domination that could occur within the workplace, and argued for things like a welfare state and the redistribution of wealth. And these arguments tended to become more and more radicalized over time, as I try to chart in my book as best I can. So that's the kind of liberalism that I think is antecedent to and contributes to the emergence of what I call liberal socialism.
How does how do these forms, I guess, of liberalism jive with the the individualism of, say, like the founding fathers and the way that they perceived of it, the way they perceived of liberty, for example, like how does that fit into the American tradition? And is that part of, I guess, why some of the more toxic elements of liberalism, the individualistic and free market capitalist elements, are a little bit, more embedded in our DNA than perhaps we would prefer?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where my own leftism comes in, right? I often tell my students, if you really want to read some good Marxist analysis, just read James Madison's Federalist 10, right? Because in Federalist 10, Madison sounds a lot like a Marxist, except he thinks that the capitalist should win. He says, look, society is always going to be invariably divided into different factions. These factions are going to be defined by their economic interests. They'll always be rich and poor, simply. And the goal of the state should be to manage affairs so that the rich win out, right? And they're not going to be tyrannized by the poor majority. Or you can look at somebody like Thomas Jefferson in his correspondence with people like John Adams. One of the things that's really telling about Jefferson is he says, look, an unnatural or artificial aristocracy of the sorts that we see in Europe is a really bad thing, and we're better off without it. But a natural aristocracy of talent, merit, individual striving, that's what this country should be all about, right?
And how does that aristocracy get naturalized, except, it basically is through land ownership, right? And land accumulation, property accumulation. That is how the virtuousness of each individual white man was determined back in the day.
Yeah, or you just have a whole bunch of slaves, get them to do the work for you, and complain in a lot of different letters about how lazy they are and how they're not generating enough for you to pay off your gambling
right.
debt. But, I agree with Michael Sandel, the great Harvard philosopher, where he points out that's what's really toxic about this kind of individualism is, on the one hand, there is an egalitarian dimension to it, right? Since there's a degree of social mobility that you find in American liberalism that you don't find in Europe, right? Where there's an aristocratic system. Because at least you can move upwards in American society. But the big price that's paid for that is, of course, if you believe that there is a natural aristocracy, then you also believe that everybody who gets to the top did so based upon their own merits. And consequently, and inversely, anybody who winds up on the bottom, they were just lazy, right? They couldn't make it. They didn't have the talents. They didn't work hard enough. And Sandel points out in a lot of ways, that's a much more toxic attitude to take than even what you'd find in the ancien regimes of Europe, where at least there was this sense of noblesse obligée that some of the aristocrats would take towards the peasantry. Because what you get now is a ruling class of so-called natural aristocrats who feel that they achieved everything by themselves and they owe nothing to the people at the bottom. And consequently, the people at the bottom are supposed to feel really bad and responsible for winding up working at a McJob rather than attributing blame to the social systems in which they live. Right. So I just want to be really clear, right? This kind of liberalism is something that my book is emphatically rejecting, along with other people like Samuel Moyn, right, who talks about new versions of this, a la Cold War liberalism. What I'm hoping to do is talk about a more inspiring version of the liberal tradition that I think is worth retrieving and recovering.
Well, it is, this may be a bit reductive, but it is just quite ironic to have, founded the country to escape kind of these, for a variety of reasons. It was really their economic interest, but at least the mythology is about escaping this notion that the aristocrats really were ordained by God to have all of this wealth, and that being religious in nature, and then replacing it with this like hyper-capitalistic individualism that is also kind of religious in nature, because the end result is like some people are deserving and some people aren't. The upgrade was just that you could, in theory, eventually be one of the deserving if you meet many criteria, and then you also have a ton of luck.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really good way of explaining the emergence of things like American conservatism in a liberal country, right, like the United States. What I always say is that one of the core claims of any conservative doctrine is the belief that some people are more deserving, and so they're deserving of more, quite frankly. And there are a lot of different permutations of that.
Prosperity gospel.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And some of it gets really weird. You point to things like prosperity gospel, right? This idea that God just wants you to have a jet engine, a jet plane, so you can go around the country.
Closer to God when you're praying. That was what a mega preacher once. I'll never forget that. I'll never forget that quote.
Also, he didn't want to fly with all the demons and Coach.
Oh, right. I forgot.
Is that true?
A little on the nose.
Yeah, I did see one of those guys who was like, God wills me to have a jet plane and you're all going to make that happen, right? And you're like, really? I think God has better things to do than to get you a plane, buddy. But yeah, absolutely, right? All this kind of stuff is really toxic and has had an enormously negative impact. And I want to point out that the point you made about the old aristocratic societies is really well taken. Don Herzog has a really good book that I recommend everybody read. It's called Poisoning the Mind of the Lower Orders. And he talks a lot about the kind of aristocratic justifications that were given for the Austrian regimes, particularly pointed to people like, say Thomas Aquinas, who said, look, there's this great chain of being, God ordained for everyone to be in their place. Peasants should be where they are, lords should be where they are, and kings should be there where they are. And maybe every now and then there's some deviations that are acceptable if the king is particularly noxious and sinful. But for the most part, you're supposed to stay where God puts you. And on the one hand, Protzark points out this is an extremely calcified, rigid system that nobody would want us to be a part of today, right? On the other hand, it does offer you some psychological consolation if you are a peasant, because you could say, well, I'm just doing what God wants me to do. It's not my fault. It's not my problem. And like I was pointing out earlier, what you find with natural meritocracy, so-called, or aristocracy, is an upgrade since there is some social mobility, as you point out, and many of us would think that is a good thing. But it's also really, really psychologically taxing in that it produces this constant anxious desire to strive to reach the top, coupled with the idea that if you don't make it, you're responsible for that in some way, shape, or form. It's a very asocial and quite abstract way of looking at things that, like you point out, often has an almost religious quality to this, if you think about all the different reverences we pay to meritocratic mythology. And I really think it's an ideology that has long since served its historical purpose, if we want to talk like Marxists, and it's destined for the ash heap of history.
Those elements could totally in agreement with you on that, but you also employ in your writing some of the more positive notions of liberalism that could be absorbed into, like, say, a leftist movement in the modern day. What are some of the classical liberal notions? Oh, gosh, I sound like Dave Rubin. What? Oh, damn it!
Ideas.
Yeah, never go full Dave, right? That's a big danger you got to avoid.
Walking it back. Like, what do you think are the elements of liberalism that can be incorporated today, especially to combat the growing illiberalism in right-wing spaces where we're not like in the, I don't know, mode of early 2000s or 90s or 80s kind of neoliberalism, free market fundamentalism, deregulatory obsess. I mean, that's still a part of the right. But like Viktor Orban, for example, in Hungary, he has a very illiberal political model that a lot of Republicans in this country, J.D. Vance is an example of this, are adopting as it relates to individual rights. So like how can we incorporate the positive elements of liberalism as it relates to just like human rights to combat this in the right-wing movement?
Yeah, it's a very complicated question, right? And I should point out, I spent an awful lot of my time writing about the right. The book I had come out last year was The Political Right and Equality, and Matt and I talked about that back in the day. And one of the reasons I wrote this new book was to point out to leftists that there are a lot worse things out there than liberalism, even classical liberalism, right? If you think about something like Orbanism or Putinism, let alone, post-fascism or neo-fascism or whatever we want to talk about. So in that respect, we should be cautious and throwing out the baby with the bathwater. But in terms of the kind of contributions liberalism has made to a progressive political project, I'll just single out two of them. So first off, like someone like Samuel Moyn, I always like to point out that liberals were extremely innovative in being amongst the first to argue that all human beings are morally equal, at the very least. And we often take this idea for granted now, but it's very much would have been counterintuitive to a lot of people in the medieval era, right? Let alone in antiquity. Leo Strauss, the great conservative philosopher writing about Aristotle, used to say, look, older philosophers like Aristotle or Plato just took for granted the idea that there's a basic immutable inequality between human beings, and that the best should rule and the best should have everything, and that's just the natural order of things. This persisted through the medieval era until you started getting people like Hobbes or Locke saying, at least for some people, no, right? There is a kind of equality inherent to every human being, and they need to be respected as the unique individuals that they are, and their rights need to be taken very, very seriously by the state. And this eventually, of course, had a kind of revolutionary implication to it when you see things like the French Revolution, the American Revolution, and indeed the Haitian Revolution be sparked by taking seriously these kinds of egalitarian creeds. And I think that we owe liberalism a serious debt for that reason, because again, whatever you might think about contemporary America, there's no doubt that a liberal democracy is an advance on an aristocratic imperial state. And then in terms of the kind of second thing that I think it's really worth acknowledging a debt to liberalism for, I think that liberal thinkers after the 19th century in particular started to take a lot more seriously concerns like economic inequality rather than just, say, political inequality. So in my book, I talk about people like, say, John Stuart Mill, who I'm guessing a lot of your listeners are familiar with. You know, John Stuart Mill, if you read him in undergrad, the first thing that you get is his essay On Liberty, right, which is a defense of free speech and freedom of expression. Great book in a lot of ways, but a lot of people don't realize that he also identified as a socialist in his autobiography. And one of the reasons he identified as a socialist is he said, look, liberals back in the day were really concerned with tackling political equality, and we owe them a great debt for that. But socialists are their more far-sighted successors because socialists realize that economic inequality is also an extremely serious problem within society and contributes to political inequality. And rather than just dismissing that, what we should try our best to do is incorporate the insights of the socialist tradition within a liberal framework to establish something that looks a lot like what I call liberal socialism. So that's somebody like Mill. And this kind of attitude of incorporating and even being extremely sympathetic to socialist insights is carried on by a lot of liberals through the 20th and indeed into the 21st century. And I think it's well worth exploring the kind of arguments that they put forward because I think they have a lot to offer.
And it's also, I guess, in merging these two philosophies, which, you know, as you lay it out, it's just not incongruent. You can apply like an egalitarian model of rights and of expansion of you know, people's basically well-being, both economic and as it relates to like the social inequalities, whether it be race or gender or sexual orientation or gender orientation, gender identity, I should say. You can incorporate that kind of egalitarian model without segmenting it when you fuse some of those elements of liberalism into a socialist vision.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So in the later parts of the book, I talk a lot of people like, say, Chantal Mouffe, or the great black radical liberal Charles Mills, or John Rawls, when all of them were trying to do what you're describing, right? Fuse various left or socialist ideas with what they took to be a value in the liberal tradition. I'll just talk about Mills, not John Stuart Mill, but Charles Mills, for those who don't know, and Rawls for a second. So, you know, Charles Mills, black radical liberal, said, look, there are a lot of valuable things, again, in this liberal idea that all people are moral equals. And of course, right, anybody who's committed to racial equality is going to want to take that extremely seriously. But in books like The Racial Contract, he says, the problem is that many liberals didn't take that very seriously, right? When they talked about egalitarian justice, what they meant in his famous phrase was just us, right? Just propertied white men. And so he says, what we want to do is really extend this liberal principle of being committed to moral equality to those who have been denied it for a very long period of time. And a lot of his work takes that very seriously and explores it in different ways. And by the end of his career, he was also starting to reincorporate various economic concerns about inequality as well in his essays on people like W.E. Du Bois. And then we have somebody like John Rawls, who I'm a big fan of. A lot of people don't realize that Rawls was deeply inspired by Karl Marx and Hegel. And he says, look, what we need to do is make the social structure the first subject of justice in a way that earlier liberals didn't take seriously. They focused on the individual and their rights. And the reason Rawls says we need to take the social structure or the basic structure as the first subject of justice is because the social structure or the basic structure is hugely determinative of where people wind up in life, including economically. And Rawls offers some very powerful arguments for why things like meritocracy is a mythology, right? Everyone winds up where they are, largely due to morally arbitrary circumstances, if it's not the result of outright domination. Once you appreciate that, a lot of the arguments Rawls thinks for economic inequality and for treating the least well-off in particular with disdain just collapse. And we move towards what he considered to be an argument for liberal socialism, what he called property-owning democracy. And I talk a lot about this in the book, right? But these kinds of liberal arguments by radical or left liberals are extremely useful, I think, for the left in terms of their analytical power and their ability to speak to the concerns of a lot of Americans who hold to liberal principles, but might be uncomfortable with the anti-egalitarian implications that a lot of classical liberals have pushed those principles towards.
Right. And well, I also think you can sell this to an even broader swath of people just from a pure political perspective. But putting that aside for a sec. Lastly, what are some of the structural obstacles within like U.S. law that make this difficult? Because as you mentioned, I mean, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights were written by property-owning white males to further the prospects of property-owning white males. So that framework is still very much relevant, I think, to when we talk about crafting rights. How do you fit this vision into that framework?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, and it's something we talk a fair bit about in my class on constitutional interpretation. I'll just single out one good example that's brought up by Liz Anderson, who's a great philosopher at UMichigan, wrote an excellent book, Hijacked, that was really influential on me. Came out just a little while ago. But one of the things that she points out is that, oddly enough, Americans are willing to tolerate violations of their rights in the workplace that they would never tolerate if it was the government that was violating those rights, right? Think about going into your workplace, right? You're told when you can go to the bathroom, what you're allowed to say, sometimes what you're able to wear. Every part of your day is routinized, right? You come and you go when your boss tells you, not otherwise. And if you work in Amazon, things get even worse, right? Think about all those piss jugs and shit like that, right? And so she says, really what we should be doing isn't a radical project in the kind of crude sense of trying to import alien ideas or international ideas into the workplace. What we should just be doing is taking seriously the kind of classical liberal rights that Americans have always accepted relative to the state, and incorporating them into the workplace by saying, look, workers should be treated well. They should have certain kinds of basic rights that are respected in the workplace. And above all else, we should be trying to democratize power in the workplace, because there's something that's really domineering about having a boss who's pretty much immune to criticism and immune to any kinds of removal, because the workplace is a site of extraordinary importance for many Americans. It's where they spend most of their time, and many Americans would want to have a better workplace so that they can thrive more consistently.
Really last question, actually, because this is from one of our listeners. Barb MR fan says, what's the difference between a social democrat and liberal socialism?
Yeah, I think that it's important to understand this as a continuum, right? A lot of people like these kind of hard and fast typologies between capitalism and socialism, and don't recognize that, of course, most societies have mixed economies now. And, the same kind of thing applies when it comes to social democracy and liberal socialism. Now, saying that, I do think that there is a distinction on the continuum, and it's this, right? Most social democrats are committed to the idea of ameliorating the worst features of capitalism, typically through redistributive programs, right? Offering things like public health care, offering things like free schooling, maybe offering things like universal daycare or dental care in Canada. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I think those are all good things. And if we were able to achieve that in the United States, it would be a big step forward, right? But a liberal socialist is going to go a lot further and say, Todd was just talking about with Anderson, it's not enough to just have these kind of statist ameliorations of capitalism. What we really need to do is shift the locus of power in society by giving workers much more of a say over how their workplaces are run, and democratizing them as radically and as consistently as possible, right? And I think what that's going to look like is taking far more seriously workers' rights within the workplace, and implementing democratic structures of responsibility in large firms, certainly. And this isn't, a bizarre idea. European social democracies have experimented with variations of this in some of the more interesting cases, like co-determination in Germany, for example. What I'm just saying is that we go a little bit further than that here in the United States.
I'm excited about the prospect of maybe furthering some sectoral bargaining in this country. I know that Tim Walz did that with nursing, I think, students in Minnesota, and that's something that Harris endorsed in 2019. So that could be something to increase worker power, at least in the short term. But really appreciate your time today, Matthew McManus. The book, which is coming out in a few months, but we will still link to it, and you can pre-order it, right? Is that true, Matt?
Yeah, you can find it on the Routledge website. Or, if you want to be really bad, you can go on Amazon. But obviously, I prefer that people order it on the website. We'll link
to the former link in the description wherever people are listening to or watching this, and at majority.fm. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. Great to talk to you.
Great to talk to you. All right, quick break. And when we come back, we are going to be speaking with Rebecca Burns about Republican donors trying to criminalize homelessness around the country. Be right back. We are back, and we are joined now by Rebecca Burns, in these times contributing editor, award-winning investigative reporter. The piece that Rebecca wrote is entitled "Inside the Rights War on the Homeless" in these times magazine. Thanks so much for coming on the show today, Rebecca.
Thanks so much for having me.
So let's start, I guess, with the genesis of this kind of movement. Nationally, which is Austin, Texas. In your piece, you write about, I mean, of course, there have been anti-homeless crackdowns across the country, but in Austin, this particular group, an organization and kind of pro-Trump super PAC donors spearheaded this effort specifically. So take us through how this started a few years ago in Austin.
Right. So as you just mentioned, criminalizing homelessness, unfortunately, is nothing new. It's something that we've been seeing on the local level, picking up in recent decades as the housing affordability crisis has intensified. What is new that I really sort of tried to point to in this piece is a more coordinated effort both to pass sweeping camping bans at the state level with, in some cases, some more serious criminal penalties and fines attached to those, and also really to defund, real sort of longer-term solutions to the housing crisis, and instead compel cities to just sweep these issues under the rug with enforcement. So the particular group that I looked at, called the Cicero Institute, was started by Joe Lonsdale. So he was a co-founder of the firm Palantir, whose ties to ICE and surveillance technology has come under scrutiny. He's sort of a self-declared political refugee who, by his own account, got sick of the politics of San Francisco and California and decamped to Austin in 2020. So when he arrived there, local activists, housing activists, progressive city council members were sort of in the midst of a push to decriminalize public camping with the rationale, that Austin was becoming less affordable, in part because of the movement of, tech moguls like Joe Lonsdale to Austin. And certainly no one is arguing that public camping is a good solution for anyone, either, certainly the individuals who are opting for that or for the general public. What they were arguing is that, in the midst of a housing crisis, criminalization is making things worse. So in 2019, Austin, for the first time in 2 decades, sort of removed a ban on camping in downtown areas with sort of stipulations, that it was important that the public right of way remained clear. And immediately this sort of triggered a backlash from, business owners, conservative activists, and particularly Texas Governor Greg Abbott, who kind of used this as a flashpoint in this sort of escalating rhetorical war with progressives in Austin. So into that fray, you sort of have Joe Lonsdale and his new think tank, the Cicero Institute, stepping in and saying, aha, we have the solution. We're going to sort of follow the move of Texas, which in 2021 passed a statewide camping ban, with also penalties for municipalities that didn't comply with enforcing the ban. We're saying now this is the model. We're going to throw out several decades of social scientific research of previous experience and say, what Austin is doing, what Texas is doing is the nationwide model sort of for other cities, other states that don't want to end up, this is sort of coded language, don't want to end up like San Francisco, don't want to end up like Austin. So since, 2021 in particular, they've sort of, led this very successful push to pass these camping bans in other states, and attached to those camping bans some really troubling provisions that actually defund proven solutions to homelessness.
So that effort to spread outside of Austin to kind of get these bills passed in other parts of the country, you write about how they're cut and paste bills, which, people will be familiar with. Recently, a lot of the anti-trans bills were a part of that kind of Republican-led conservative effort where they basically send a framework to these state governments, cut and paste, enact very similar policies around the country. How far has this spread, the Cicero Institute's effort in particular, across the country?
Right. So this is an approach that, viewers will also be familiar with groups like ALEC that have run this sort of cut and paste bill mill approach where state legislators, according to folks who have fought these bills on the state level, don't even sort of necessarily know what they're looking at when they introduce legislation that they're told this is a great solution. If you're getting calls from constituents who are upset about tent encampments, here you go, here's your prepackaged solution. So they have had quite a bit of success, the Cicero Institute, in passing state legislation. The National Homelessness Law Center has been tracking this. 9 states, I believe, have now passed part or all of their template legislation. And what's sort of especially worrying that advocates on the ground will point to is the ways that these types of bills have morphed. So Kentucky this year passed Cicero template legislation as part of sort of a broader sort of regressive criminal justice reform bill that also includes language sort of amending, state stand your ground laws, which have come under a lot of scrutiny to say, someone camping on your property could be a reason to justify deadly force. So that's really sort of a very ominous measure that just took effect, so we'll have to see what it plays out. But certainly, I think worries a lot of folks who have family members experiencing homelessness, a lot of advocates, a lot of folks who are in this situation as, kind of providing cover to violence against unhoused people, which is something that we're seeing increasingly.
And where are the other states where this has been implemented? And is it just red states, or because how is this? We know that this is bipartisan in cities as well, but it seems like even though this guy has clear pro-Trump Peter Thiel connections, this institute is making gains in a bipartisan manner.
Yeah. So I will say, the foremost example right now of police sweeps of homeless encampments is happening in California. And I think we see groups like the Cicero Institute playing a role in sort of moving discourse to the right in California, but Gavin Newsom is choosing to do that. That's not something that the right is making him do. And we have Democrats also like San Francisco's London Breed coming out with both strong rhetoric and really sort of troubling non-solutions like busing people out of town. So I think, the state of leadership and discourse on this issue is pretty bad across the board. I think what the Cicero Institute, represents is sort of a further lurch to the right in states, particularly like Florida, where they were very involved, have been, Joe Lonsdale's company has been a big donor to Governor Rick DeSantis's.
Ron
DeSantis's, excuse me.
Rick Scott.
Two Florida governors. Yes.
I got you. I confused Fetterman and who was it? Manchin the other day. They're all assholes. Okay, keep going.
So yeah, we saw Florida pass, a bill, praised by Joe Lonsdale and the Cicero Institute this spring. I requested public records from Florida legislators. They were heavily involved, the Cicero Institute, in sort of providing Florida with the specific language. Joe Lonsdale even met with Republican officials, at a Napa winery the year before. And Florida's bill, includes both sort of this standard measure of criminalizing camping statewide, as well as sort of provisions allowing individual business owners to sue any municipality that they feel aren't sort of adequately enforcing the camping ban, and also including provisions that redirect funding for what's known as permanent supportive housing to sort of other short-term solutions. So I think we can sort of understand all of these things as ways to sort of more aggressively sweep the problem under the rug, relocate. Another sort of emphasis of the Cicero Institute is sanction campsites that usually where these have been enacted are far away from services, places where folks have trouble accessing often, medical care, certainly employment. And there's a lot of concern from advocates, who even have said, a few years ago, we might have supported this as sort of a short-term patchwork solution to say, okay, here's an area where if you camp here, you won't be policed, you won't be criminalized. But the way that that's actually played out, is sort of increasing enforcement elsewhere. And then also just, not a clear path out of, staying at a sanctioned encampment if, again, it's located in a remote area where you can't access the kind of services that you need to sort of get back on your feet.
And this movement for basically criminalizing homelessness and at the same time not addressing anything about housing affordability, which has become more and more unaffordable, particularly since Reagan was really the one who just slashed for the federal housing budget, and the federal government hasn't recovered since then. The problem has just gotten worse and worse, and these kind of real estate groups and these large corporate landlords have been really effective at buying our government for their own projects here, in part because also there are conservative billionaires and funders like Leonard Leo, who I guess has connections to this guy Lonsdale, who are behind or at least cheering on, and their comrades, their colleagues, are behind taking stuff like this all the way up to the Supreme Court. So, can you talk a bit about how this recent Supreme Court anti-camping ruling affects these efforts as well?
Right. So, we sort of see Leo behind the scenes, both in this decision, Joe Lonsdale, who also, Leonard Leo sort of granted him a very rare podcast interview earlier this year. We don't know that much about what exactly their relationship is, but, Joe Lonsdale kind of thanks Leo in his public celebration of the Supreme Court decision that you mentioned for Leo's advice and support of the Cicero Institute's amicus brief. So we sort of see Leo, behind the scenes on this issue, on a myriad of cases, that landlord lobbying groups have been bringing for years to sort of try and attack rent control. And so, I think the thing here is it would be sort of a mistake to segment policy issues, surrounding homelessness from sort of just what we see happening in the broader housing market, as you just alluded to. We have a situation now where it's really not hard to understand why there's thought to be sort of a historic increase in people ending up on the streets.
It must be their individual moral deficiencies.
Right. If there's a fairly simple sort of macro explanation, we have a lot of cities where even if wages have started to rise and rent increases in some places have started to cool, we still have rent increasing twice as fast as wages. What happens in a lot of places, people can't afford housing. Are there other issues at play sometimes with mental health and substance abuse? Yes, of course, things look different from the individual. But yeah, I think, advocates have kind of been trying to get across for years that this is a housing problem, and sort of the right-wing approach that unfortunately is now, being adopted, particularly by figures like Gavin Newsom, is to sort of redirect and say, no, it's an individual problem. People are homeless by choice.
And I guess that's a good place where we can kind of wrap here. If you could just emphasize the inefficacy of these police crackdowns on unhoused individuals, as well as, of course, like the obvious cruelty that we're seeing with it.
Yeah. So, I mean, to start at just sort of the structural level, all of the social scientific research here says this is not productive, effective, in the sort of in the community sense. When police target tent encampments, people usually move down a little further down the road, or, move temporarily and then come back. There's no documented decrease among researchers I talked to when you enact these criminalization laws. The counted number of homelessness, the counted number of people who are unhoused does not decrease in their aftermath. And then, of course, on the individual level, these can be, destabilizing to deadly. People lose life-saving medications, medical devices. People are forced into, less unsafe areas or less safe areas, under highway underpasses, creek beds. So yeah, it really is just sort of, both a counterproductive and cruel and sometimes deadly approach that's sort of an abdication of public policy responsibility and attempt to redirect to a story about individual failure that we know isn't true.
Rebecca Burns, the piece is called "Inside the Rights War on the Homeless." It's in These Times magazine, which is a must-read for listeners of this program. We'll put a link to that wherever people are listening to or watching this below. Thanks so much for your time today, Rebecca. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right, folks, with that, we're going to wrap up the free part of this program, but we do apparently have Brandon Sutton, so I went to that whole spiel.
Yep.
Miscommunication, I see. Brandon, let's go. Hello, we're bringing you on screen. But for and we'll chat about the discourse in just a second.
I gotta take the Chiron down. I don't want to misidentify Brandon here. So he's not Rebecca Burns. That was our previous guest.
That is not Rebecca Burns. That is Brandon Sutton.
With a new background. Are you in a new location, Brandon?
Yeah, I'm in London.
And a freshly shaved upper lip, it looks like, too.
Oh yeah, I like being smooth.
So don't we all? What's happening on the discourse?
I don't know yet because I'm in London, but I will let you guys know via Twitter, where you can follow me at Pretty Bad Lefty when it is out, which will be probably early next week.
Why did I think you were not coming on today?
Because I'm in London, but I can still make it. They have internet here.
Oh,
they have internet here now.
You just wanted to hang.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
I think Matt is not here because he's at Disney World, right?
I guess. I mean,
well, don't dox him. Don't give him on his assassination coordinates.
Assassination coordinates.
He's at Epcot right now.
Oh.
Target acquired. I don't know what I'm thinking about.
But while he's having fun with his kids, family man Matt Binder, you should check out Scam Economy. Check out Doomed. Matt, what's happening on Left Reckoning?
Yeah, Left Reckoning. I got did a short sort of summer hour show because Griscom's on vacation. But I did talk about Joe Rogan rescinding his endorsement in such a weak way.
Yeah.
Insane. When I said RFK was the one, relative to Trump and Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, I meant as a person. Not as a presidential candidate. I'm not in
Oh, come on, dude.
People get involved in politics. I'm tired of all these political people. They just can't say what they mean in media.
Well, you know what? He must have gotten some call from someone related to the Trump campaign, because now they're worried that RFK is taking from Trump, which I think is the dad is bearing that out.
I feel like was sort of a consideration we made immediately. Why is that the first time we're thinking about this?
Yeah.
I think Trump tweeted about it. I think I heard that Trump was like tweeted something on Truth Social, or I don't know, he truthed it. I don't know what they do on Truth Social. He truthed it out. That like they should boo him at the next UFC fight. Because like UFC fights are like Chud Central. So Joe Rogan being the announcer there and being like the color commentator there, like he did not want to get booed at his like other place of work.
That's how you impose discipline, folks. You go right at their base and you say, hey, these people are not going to treat you nicely if you don't get on board, buddy. And look, pressure works with some people when they're weak. And I think that's just the conclusion we draw with Joe Rogan. Because what's the point? I'm sorry. We have to talk about this. What's the point of selling, say, a supplement company with like Brain Force or whatever his one that is like the same sort of thing that Alex Jones does? What's the point of selling Onnit Labs, his supplement company, to Unilever, one of the world's largest corporations, if you can't be independent on things like this? Isn't that his whole thing, that he can just say what he means?
Yeah, I guess that's his whole thing. But
like, I get Kyle
Spotify
Rittenhouse.
gave him a huge raise, and he's got to maintain a certain audience.
I get Kyle Rittenhouse like needing to bend the knee.
Yeah.
Right? Because he's going to end up like George Zimmerman at some point, and that's not a good news for him.
No.
Right? When Texas A&M's like, he's not coming here. I don't know why, or maybe it was Texas Tech. But anyway, but Rogan, I'd like to see some alpha male. A little bit.
Yeah.
He knows what side his bread is buttered on. Like 90% of his audience are Trump voters. They're chuds. He can pretend to be apolitical all he wants, but he knew that the moment he was labeled as being disloyal to Trump, that was going to deeply not just eat into his viewers, but have them come out online, like shoot photos of him attached to Bud Light, transvestigate him. He seems like he's very sensitive. He pretends like he's not, but like even when people made fun of him for like promoting ivermectin, he came out and was like basically crying. He at least needs to be taken seriously by the audience he likes.
Couldn't be me.
Gosh, I do love the idea of transvestigating Joe Rogan. That should be.
That's what happened in like 2 seconds when Kyle Rittenhouse said vote for Ron Paul.
They're basically doing it with Tim Walz at this point. I mean,
it's literally the new witch hunt.
Yeah. They're not saying he's trans. They're just saying right now that he's a closeted gay person because I don't know, because he shook his wife's hand before hugging her. This is really smoking gun
also,
stuff.
Trump is the queenest guy in the world, and a new picture of J.D. Vance just emerged in a girl's bathroom in high school with 3 women at a urinal and him being like, what's going on here?
And the stuff of him dressed up. And,
so good luck with that attack, guys.
Yeah, we shall see. Anyway, we'll talk about all of this in the fun half, but I will say on ESPN we talked about on Monday, the Olympics, the controversies coming out of the Olympics, both with Jordan Childs and obviously Imani Khalif, who update to that story. Perhaps we'll talk about that a little bit more in the fun half. Imani Khalif is suing Elon Musk and J.K. Rowling, or at least filing a legal complaint in Paris because of cyberbullying, which rocks. We talked about that. Also, NFL preseason and our thoughts on some of the quarterback debuts in this incredible class. YouTube.com/ESPN show. All right, we will head into the fun half. We'll turn on the phone lines or open them up right after we're done with the fun half song. So that's, I know there's somebody who wants to call in particular here. That's your cue. Once it's over, we'll open up the lines. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Okay, Emma, please.
Well, I feel that my voice is sorely lacking on the Majority Report.
Wait, look, Sam is unpopular.
I do deserve a vacation at Disney World. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome Emma to the show.
It is Thursday.
I think you need to take over for Sam.
Yes, please.
No. I'm gonna pause you right there.
Wait, what?
You can't encourage Emma to live like this. And I'll tell you why. She was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. She was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
What?
Tour, sushi, and poker.
Tim's upset.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. She was offered a tour, sushi, and
that's what we call it in the biz.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
Right.
Tour, sushi, and poker.
We're gonna get demonetized.
I just think that what you did to Tim Pool was mean.
Free speech.
That's not what we're about here. Look at how sad he's become now. We shouldn't even talk about it because I think you're responsible.
I probably am in a certain way, but let's get to the meltdown here.
Tour, Tour. Sushi and poker with the boys.
Oh my God.
Tour.
Wow.
Sushi.
I'm sorry, I'm losing my fucking mind.
Was offered a tour.
Yeah.
Sushi and poker with the boys.
Logic.
Tour. Sushi and poker with the boys. Boy. Tour.
I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a kid.
Tour.
I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a little kid. Had this debate 7,000 times.
A little kid. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a kid. Tour.
I'm losing my fucking mind.
Some people just don't understand.
So I'm not trying to be a dick right now, but like, I absolutely think the U.S. should be providing me with a wife and kids.
That's not what we're talking about here.
Okay, all right. It's not a fun job.
Tour. That's a real thing. That's real thing. Real thing. Willy Wonka tour. That's a real thing. That's real thing. Real thing. What's that offered a tour? That's a real thing. That's real thing. Real thing. That's a real thing. That's real thing. Real thing. What's that offered a tour?
Ladies and gentlemen, Joe Rogan has done it again.
That offered a tour? That's a real thing. That's poker with the boys.
I think he might be blowing it out of proportion.
Real thing. That's poker with the boys. That offered a tour? That's a real thing. That's poker.
Let's go, Joey.
Tour. Sushi and poker with the boys.
Take it easy, buddy.
Tour. Sushi and poker.
Things have really gotten out of hand.
Sushi and poker with the boys.
Delusional.
Tour.
Deluded.
Sushi.
You don't have a clue as to what's going on. Live YouTube.
Sam has like the weight of the world on his shoulders.
Sam doesn't want to do this show anymore.
It
was so much easier when the Majority Report was just you. You were happy.
Let's change the subject.
Right. Rangers and Knicks are doing great.
Now, shut up. I don't want people saying reckless things on your program.
That's
No.
one of the most difficult parts about this show.
This is a pro-killing podcast.
I'm thinking maybe it's time we bury the hatchet.
Left is best.
Violet tour.
Don't be foolish and don't fucking tweet at me and don't binge. The way Emma has cucked all of these people, love it.
That's where my heart is, so I wrote my honors thesis about it.
Oh,
Sorry,
she
finance.
wrote an honest thesis. I guess I should hand the main mic to you now.
You are to the right of me on foreign policy.
We already fund Israel, dude. Are you against that?
That's a tougher question I have an answer to.
Incredible theme song.
Hi, Bumbler.
Emma Vigeland, absolutely one of my favorite people. Actually, not just in the game, like period.
We are back, folks. It is the fun half, and I am turning off the voicemail. 646-257-3920. We'll read some IMs here. Goof Bits. Tim Pool was talking about how he would have fought Imani Khalif in a video that I'm guessing he deleted because LOL.
He would have got beat up.
Oh,
She would have worked him like a drum. Ooh.
I mean, like, I feel like I could beat him up. I'm not even a professional
And
boxer.
you've been in the same room as him.
He's not a big guy. No.
He could have joined the Olympics. He could have been in the Olympic skateboarding. Lose to like a 12-year-old like Japanese girl.
He could have been. We should push for that next time around. More pressure. Yeah, I want more pressure on him. Class Trader. Austin also ended the moratorium on COVID evictions May 2021. I was a victim of that due to converting our small, adorable apartments into condos for short-term rentals. That's out of control. You know, you just see, like, I was actually just, I'm thinking about like taking a trip or something. I was like looking on Airbnb or Vrbo or whatever for those rental homes, and you just see in Texas, like I was just looking around Austin, there are so many just homes that were bought just for vacation rentals, just corporate ownership.
I do hotels pretty much exclusively now. I don't travel that much, but I do that for but there's one time I went to New Orleans and I got what's the Garden District, and I just felt like this is very amazingly nice, and also I felt wrong for like being embedded in that community and just for like the profits of Airbnb and maybe a speculator.
Dave from Jamaica says, very good interview. Thank you. Snarknorsky, thanks for this interview with Professor McManus. Very interesting discussion. I found him on Blue Sky and followed him there. The AM Quickie had his Twitter link, but I didn't go there because I left the Nazi bird site, F Elon Musk. So I was happy to find him on Blue Sky. Thanks for introducing me to his work, for sure. Kowalski from Nebraska. I consider myself a classical Republican like Ulysses S. Grant, Lincoln, or John Brown. That's pretty amazing. We should call ourselves classical Republicans.
I don't know if you could consider John Brown a classical Republican. I think
right.
Lincoln maybe distanced himself during the campaign from what happened there.
Potted plant, hearing the fear in Frank Luntz's voice is the feeling you get when you need a slice of cheesecake.
Got to update the hair, Luntz. You're graying down below.
No, you mean the toupee?
Exactly, that's what I'm saying.
Dude, can he afford a transplant? I guess sometimes that doesn't work on everybody. Joe Buck said he almost died from all the hair plugs he got. So, right.
Host versus graft syndrome. That was like the whole subplot on Arrested Development.
Oh, right. That was the whole subplot on Arrested Development. Right. David Cross was in a wheelchair from his hair transplant, right, for that episode.
Yeah.
Violator child. Abortion should be legal up until birth because a viable fetus is induced to save both the mother and infant. Even before viability induction is attempted to try to give both the parent and infant a chance at survival. We need to stop legitimizing their language by avoiding the reality that abortion and induction is healthcare practice to save lives. That's a great point.
And it's a category error to say Republicans or even lawmakers should be involved in this.
Yes.
Like if lawmakers are going to be involved in healthcare, it should be publicly providing it to people.
Absolutely. Let's do this because this was a really big story. We'll to here, Matt. In the insulin thing, yeah. And then there's a few links I put at the bottom that I may point to. So yesterday, Trump spoke at a rally in Asheville, North Carolina. Polls are showing that Kamala Harris is surging in North Carolina, and now we're in like a very light purple, potentially swing state situation in that state, especially because the Republican running for governor, Roy Cooper's term limited out, is an absolute lunatic and was in attendance at this rally as well. But Trump is just like reeling right now. So here he is taking credit for the lowering of insulin co-payments to $35, which is what Biden signed into law via the Inflation Reduction Act in 2022. Trump's taking credit here.
Now he's going for the big one, isn't he? Huh? We're going to deliver lower prices, lower drug costs, new options that will dramatically reduce the crushing burden of American patients. Kamala and Joe tried to take credit for $35 insulin. You know that. You know who did that? I did that. I did the insulin, and it kicked in. And I remember when I did it, it had to be a statute. It was a certain statute that took a certain period of time. I said, I hope I'm elected because somebody's going to get a lot of credit for doing what I got done. I got it done, $35 insulin, and now they take credit for it. It's terrible, terrible. They take credit for a lot of things they shouldn't be taking credit for. If they said, congratulations, you did a good job on insulin, that would be nice. Nobody's going to go crazy about that. Congratulations, because insulin was impossible for people to afford. They were dying. They didn't get it. The expense was, I got it for $35. Nobody thinks it's like even possible. But they could say like, you did a great job, thank you very much. Or you did a good job. But instead they say, we brought insulin in at $35. It's a lie. Kamala is fighting for health care for illegal aliens and fighting.
Yeah, later in a minute, like he barely can bring up Kamala. I watched a lot of this. He repeatedly referred to the candidate that he was facing as he over and over again. He brings up Biden probably, I don't know, at a 3-1 margin with Kamala. Like the dude is just desperately wishing he could manifest Biden back in the race.
Or he's having trouble establishing new short-term memories for some unspecified reason.
Who knows, right?
Who knows? But like, I mean, this is an outrageous lie. This is the fact of the situation. $35 insulin was Trump, and this isn't, by the way, this is from June. Trump has been claiming credit for this for months. He says that Biden had nothing to do with it, but that's not the case. If we could just scroll down here a little bit. The Trump administration, yes, during COVID, established a voluntary limited time limited model under the Center for Medicare and Medicaid, known as the Part D Senior Savings Model. It saved some prescription drug plans under Medicare Part D. It capped them from 2021 to 2023, and this was essentially an emergency measure. But Biden signed this into law as a part of the Inflation Reduction Act, which then also used Part D to charge no more than $35 per month for all covered insulin products, and also limits cost sharing for insulin covered under Part B to $35 a month. Deductibles no longer apply to insulins under Part D or Part B, and this took effect in 2023. Again, this was legislation by Biden that was there, and you can see like the comparison there, that was implemented for the rest of the country. And that's not all that the Biden administration did on this front. Can we just pull up the E here? Because this was announced this morning, and I'm encouraged to see that Kamala Harris seems to be hiring or talking to Obama-era foreign policy people for her administration, but keeping a lot of the Inflation Reduction Act economic people. We'll see on Lena Khan and antitrust, but on like the economic brain trust, what'd you say?
Lena Khan's not going to be fired for a while, at least. I think if she's going to get out.
Right. So that's still a question mark. But in terms of who she's staffing her campaign with, and then potentially her administration, keeping them on as advisors, a lot of the good people on the economic side are sticking around. So I'm optimistic about this. This was what was announced by the White House today, this morning. The Medicare has finally been allowed via, again, the Inflation Reduction Act to negotiate with drug companies. Previously, this had been barred. The federal government had not been allowed.
Communism, apparently, according to Tim Pool.
Right, had not been allowed to basically barter with Big Pharma to reduce the price of drugs, even though Medicare provides health care coverage for 67 million older people, and then also, of course, under Medicaid, disabled Americans.